of President Trump receiving or placing a call between 11:06 and 6:54 p.m. As to what the president was doing that afternoon, the presidential daily diary is also silent. It contains no information from the period between 1:21 p.m. and 4:03 p.m. There are also no photos of President Trump during this critical period between 1:21 in the Oval Office and when he went outside to the Rose Garden after 4 o'clock. The chief White House photographer wanted to take pictures because it was, in her words, very important for his archives and for history. But she was told, quote, no photographs. Despite the lack of photos or an official record, we've learned what President Trump was doing while he was watching TV in the dining room. But before we get into that, it's important to understand what he never did that day. Let's watch.
So are you aware of any phone call by the President of the United States to the Secretary of Defense that day?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Are you aware of any phone call by the President of the United States to the Attorney General of the United States that day?
No.
Are you aware of any phone call by the President of the United States to the Secretary of Homeland Security that day?
I'm not aware of that, no.
Did you ever hear the President
No.
ask for the National
No.
Guard? Did you ever hear the President ask for law enforcement response?
No.
So as somebody who works in the national security space and with the National Security Council, if there were going to be troops present or called up for a rally in Washington, D.C., for example, is that something that you would have been aware of?
Yeah, I would have.
Do you know if you asked anybody to reach out to any of those that we just listed off? National Guard, DOD, FBI, Homeland Security, Secret Service, Mayor Bowser, the Capitol Police, about the situation at the Capitol?
I'm not aware of any of those requests. No, sir.
We have confirmed in numerous interviews with senior law enforcement and military leaders, Vice President Pence's staff and D.C. government officials. None of them, not one, heard from President Trump that day. He did not call to issue orders. He did not call to offer assistance. This week, we received additional testimony from yet another witness about why the president didn't make any efforts to quell the attack. The former White House employee with national security responsibilities told us about a conversation with senior advisor Eric Hirschman and Pat Cipollone, the top White House lawyer. This conversation was about a pending call from the Pentagon seeking to coordinate on the response to the attack. Mr. Hirschman turned to Mr. Cipollone and said, the president didn't want to do anything. And so Mr. Cipollone had to take the call himself. So if President Trump wasn't calling law enforcement or military leaders, what did President Trump spend his time doing that afternoon while he first settled into the dining room? He was calling senators to encourage them to delay or object to the certification. Here's Kayleigh McEnany, his press secretary, to explain.
Okay. All right, then it says back there, and he wants list of senators. And then he's calling them one by one. Do you know which ones he called?
To the best of my recollection, no. As I say in my notes, he wanted a list of the senators, and I left him at that point.
Because the presidential call log is empty, we do not yet know precisely which senators President Trump was calling. But we do know from Rudy Giuliani's phone records that President Trump also called him at 1:39, after he had been told that the riot was underway at the Capitol. Mr. Giuliani was President Trump's lead election attorney. According to the phone records, the president's call with him lasted approximately 4 minutes. Recall that Fox News was on in the dining room. Let's take a look at what was airing as this call was ending.
The president, as we all saw, fired this crowd up. They've all, tens of thousands, maybe 100,000 or more, have gone down to the Capitol or elsewhere in the city, and they're very upset. Now, I jumped down as soon as we heard the news that Brett gave you about Mike Pence. I started talking to these people. I said, what do you think? One woman, an Air Force veteran from Missouri, said she was, quote, disgusted to hear that news and that it was his duty to do something. And I told her, I said, there's nothing in the Constitution unilaterally that Vice President Pence could do. She said, that doesn't matter. He should have fought for Trump.
At 1:49, here's what was happening at the Capitol with President Trump's fired up supporters.
We're going to give riot warning. We're going to try and get compliance, but this is now effectively a riot.
49 hours declaring it a riot.
What did President Trump do at 1:49 as the DC police at the same time were declaring a riot at the Capitol? As you can see on the screen, he tweeted out a link to the recording of his ellipse speech. This was the same speech in which he knowingly sent an armed mob to the Capitol, but President Trump made no comment about the lawlessness and the violence. I yield to the gentleman from Illinois.
The next action President Trump took was to tweet at 2:24 p.m. What happened during the 35 minutes between his last tweet at 1:49 and 2:24? His staff repeatedly came into the room to see him and plead that he make a strong public statement condemning the violence and instructing the mob to leave the Capitol. He did not relent until after 4 o'clock when he went out to go to the Rose Garden to film his now infamous go home message. Pat Cipollone was a top White House lawyer. Here's what he told us about his reaction to seeing the violence and his advice throughout the afternoon.
When did you first realize that there was actual violence or rioting?
I first realized that it may have been on television, or it may have been Tony, or it may have been Bill, but I found out that people were, they weren't in the Capitol yet, but they were, and then I started watching it, and, then I was aware.
What specifically did you think needed to be done?
I think I was pretty clear there needed to be an immediate and forceful response statement, public statement that people need to leave the Capitol now.
My question is exactly that. That it sounds like you, from the very onset of violence at the Capitol, right around 2 o'clock, were pushing for a strong statement that people should leave the Capitol. Is that right?
I was, and others were as well.
Okay.
Pat, you said that you expressed your opinion forcefully. Could you tell us exactly how you did that?
Yeah, I can't, don't have, I have to, on the privilege issue, I can't talk about conversations with the president, but I can generically say that I said, people need to be told, there needs to be a public announcement fast that they need to leave the Capitol.
And Pat, could you let us know approximately when you said that?
Approximately when? Almost immediately after I found out people were getting into the Capitol or approaching the Capitol in a way that was violent.
Do you remember any discussion with Mark Meadows with respect to his view that the president didn't want to do anything? Was somehow resistant to wanting to say something along the lines that you suggest?
And it's not just to be clear, many people suggested it. Not just me, many people felt the same way. I'm sure I had conversations with Mark about this during the course of the day and expressed my opinion very forcefully that this needs to be done.
So your advice was tell people to leave the Capitol, and it took over 2 hours when there were subsequent statements made, tweets put forth that in your view were insufficient. Did you continue, Mr. Cipollone, throughout the period of time up until 4/17, continue, you and others, to push for a stronger statement?
Yes.
Were you joined in that effort by Ivanka Trump?
Yes.
By Eric Hershman?
Yes.
By Mark Meadows?
Yes.
White House counsel's office wanted there to be a strong statement out to condemn the rioters. I'm confident in that. I'm confident that Ivanka Trump wanted there to be a strong statement to condemn the rioters. I don't know the private conversation she had with Mr. Trump, but I remember when she came to the office one time with White House counsel's office, when she came to the chief of staff's office with White House counsel's office, she was talking about the speech later that day and trying to get her dad on board with saying something that was more direct than he had wanted to at the time and throughout the afternoon.
And I think Mark also I remember him getting Ivanka involved because it's like, get Ivanka down here because he thought that would be important. I don't think Jared was there in the morning, but I think he came later. I remember thinking it was important to get him in there too. And of course, Pat Philbin, was expressing the same things. I mean, Pat Philbin, was very, as I said, I don't think there was one of these meetings where there might have been, but for the most part, I remember that both of us going down together, going back, getting on phone calls. He was also very clearly expressing this view.
Pat Cipollone and Cassidy Hutchinson, an aide to Chief of Staff Mark Meadows, also told us about the Hang Mike Pence chants. As you will see, Mr. Cipollone recalled conversations about those chants in the West Wing, but he relied on executive privilege to maintain confidentiality over his and others' direct communications with the president. Although Mr. Cipollone was unwilling to provide more detail, Ms. Hutchison provided more explicit information, filling in those blanks. See that for yourself.
It wasn't until Mark hung up the phone, handed it back to me. I went back to my desk. A couple minutes later, him and Pat came back, possibly Eric Hirschman too. I'm pretty sure Eric Hirschman was there. But I'm confident it was Pat that was there. I remember Pat saying something to the effect of, Mark, we need to do something more. They're literally calling for the vice president to be effing hung. And Mark had responded something to the effect of, you heard him, Pat. He thinks Mike deserves it. He doesn't think they're doing anything wrong. To which Pat said something, this is effing crazy. We need to be doing something more. Briefly stepped into Mark's office.
Do you remember any discussion at any point during the day about rioters at the Capitol chanting, "Hang Mike Pence"?
Yes, I remember hearing about that. Yes.
Yeah.
I don't know if I observed that myself on TV.
I'm just curious. I understand the privilege line you've drawn, but do you remember what you can share with us about the discussion about those chants, the "Hang Mike Pence" chants?
I can tell you my view of that.
Yeah, please.
My view of that is outrageous. And for anyone to suggest such a thing as the vice president of the United States, for people in that crowd to be chanting that, I thought it was terrible. I thought it was outrageous and wrong. And I expressed that very clearly.
With respect to your conversations with Mr. Meadows, though, did you specifically raise a concern over the vice president with him, and how did he respond?
I believe I raised a concern about the vice president, and I again, the nature of his response, without recalling exactly, was people were doing all that they could.
And what about the president? Did he indicate whether he thought the president was doing what needed to be done to protect the vice president?
Yeah, just sort of that question.
For production, yeah. Okay. I'm being shut down.
I see.
In addition, Mr. Cipollone testified that it would have been feasible, as commentators on television were suggesting, for President Trump to immediately appear at the podium in the press room to address the nation.
Would it have been possible at any moment for the president to walk down to the podium in the briefing room and talk to the nation at any time between when you first gave him that advice at 2 o'clock and 4:17 when the video statement? Would that have been possible?
Would it have been possible?
Yes.
Yes, it would have been possible.
We just heard Mr. Cipollone say that President Trump could have gone to the press briefing room to issue a statement at any moment. To give you a sense of just how easy that would have been, let's take a look at a map of the West Wing. As we saw earlier, the president's private dining room is at the bottom of the map. The press briefing room is at the top, highlighted in blue, and the Rose Garden, where the president ultimately filmed his go home video, is on the right next to the Oval Office, and that's highlighted in green. Ms. Matthews, how quickly could the president have gotten on camera in the press briefing room to deliver a statement to the nation?
So as you outlined, it would take probably less than 60 seconds from the Oval Office dining room over to the press briefing room. And for folks that might not know, the briefing room is the room that you see the White House press secretary do briefings from, with the podium and the blue backdrop. And there's a camera that is on in there at all times. And so if the president had wanted to make a statement and address the American people, he could have been on camera almost instantly. And conversely, the White House press corps has offices that are located directly behind the briefing room. And so if he had wanted to make an address from the Oval Office, we could have assembled the White House press corps probably in a matter of minutes to get them into the Oval for him to do an on-camera address.
Thank you. Other witnesses have given us their views on that question. For example, General Keith Kellogg told us that some staff were concerned that a live appearance by the president at the microphones at that moment could actually make matters worse. He told us he recommended against doing a press conference because during his 4 years in the Trump administration, quote, there wasn't a single clean press conference we had had. President Trump's advisors knew his state of mind at that moment, and they were worried about what he would say in unscripted comments. I yield to the gentlewoman from Virginia.
Thank you. As you've heard, by 2 o'clock, multiple staff members in the White House recognized that a serious situation was underway at the Capitol. Personally, I recall being evacuated from the House office building where we're sitting before this time, and it was due to the discovery of 2 pipe bombs in nearby buildings. Ms. Matthews, around the same time, you were watching the violence unfold on television and social media with colleagues, including with Ben Williamson, a senior aide to Mark Meadows and the acting director of communications. You told us that before President Trump sent his next tweet at 2:24, Mr. Williamson got up to go see Mr. Meadows, and you got up to go see Kayleigh McEnany. Why did you both do that?
So Ben and I were watching the coverage unfold from one of the offices in the West Wing, and we both recognized that the situation was escalating, and it was escalating quickly, and that the president needed to be out there immediately to tell these people to go home and condemn the violence that we were seeing. So I told him that I was going to make that recommendation to Kayleigh, and he said he was going to make the same recommendation to the Chief of Staff, Mark Meadows.
Thank you. And one of your colleagues in the press office, Judd Deere, told us he also went to see Ms. McEnany at that time. Let's hear what he said about this critical period of time, right as the rioters were getting into the Capitol.
And why did you think it was necessary to say something?
Well, I mean, it appears that individuals are storming the U.S. Capitol building. They also appear to be supporters of Donald Trump who may have been in attendance at the rally. We're going to need to say something.
And did you have a view as to what should be said by the White House?
If I recall, I told Kayleigh that I thought that we needed to encourage individuals to stop, to respect law enforcement, and to go home.
Although President Trump was aware of the ongoing riot, he did not take any immediate action to address the lawlessness. Instead, at 2:03, he called Rudy Giuliani again, and that call lasted for over 8 minutes. Moments later, at 2:13, rioters broke into the Capitol itself. One of the Proud Boys charged with seditious conspiracy, Dominic Pizzola, used an officer's shield to smash a window, and rioters flooded into the building. As rioters were entering the building, the Secret Service held Vice President Pence in his office right off the Senate chamber for 13 minutes as they worked to clear a safe path to a secure location. Now listen to some of that radio traffic and see what they were seeing as the protesters got just feet away from where the Vice President was holding.
Oh, they can't get the building. Hold. Turn that door up. If we're moving, we need to move now. Copy. If we lose any more time, we may lose the ability to leave. So if we're going to leave, we need to do it now.
They've gained access to the second floor, and I've got public about 5 feet from me down here below.
Okay, copy. They are on the second floor, moving in now. We may want to consider getting out and leaving now. Copy.
Will we encounter the people once we make our way?
Repeat.
Encounter any individuals if we made our way to the.
There's 6 officers between us and the people that are 5 to 10 feet away from me.
Stand by. I'm going down to evaluate.
Go ahead.
We have a clear shot if we move quickly. We got smoke downstairs set by unknown smoke set downstairs by the protesters.
Is that route compromised?
We have this secure. However, we will bypass some protesters that are being contained. There is smoke, unknown what kind of smoke it is. Copy.
Clear, we're coming out now, all right? Make a way.
The President's National Security Council staff was listening to these developments and tracking them in real time. On the screen, you can see excerpts from the chat logs among the President's National Security Council staff. At 2:13, the staff learned that the rioters were kicking in the windows at the Capitol. 3 minutes later, the staff said the Vice President was being pulled, which meant agents evacuated him from the Senate floor. At 2:24, the staff noted that the Secret Service agents at the Capitol did not, quote, sound good right now. Earlier, you heard from a security professional who had been working in the White House complex on January 6th with access to relevant information and a responsibility to report to national security officials. We asked this person, what was meant by the comment that the Secret Service agents did not, quote, sound good right now? In the following clip of that testimony, which has been modified to protect the individual's identity, the professional discusses what they heard from listening to the incoming radio traffic that day.
Okay. That last entry in this page of service, the Capitol does not sound good right now.
Correct.
What does that mean?
The members of the VP detail at this time were starting to fear for their own lives. There was a lot of yelling, a lot of very personal calls over the radio. So it was disturbing. I don't like talking about it, but there were calls to say goodbye to family members, so on and so forth. It was getting, for whatever the reason was on the ground, the VP detail thought that this was about to get very ugly.
And did you hear that over the radio?
Correct.
Okay. What was the response by the agents, Secret Service agents who were there?
Everybody kept saying, at that point it was just reassurances, or I think there were discussions of reinforcements coming, but again, it was just chaos. They were just yelling.
Obviously, you conveyed the disturbing, but what prompted you to put it into an entry, as it states there, service for the Capitol?
If they're running out of options and they're getting nervous, it sounds like that we came very close to either service having to use lethal options or worse. Like at that point, I don't know. Is the VP compromised? Is the detail I don't know. Like, we didn't have visibility, but it doesn't. If they're screaming and saying things like "say goodbye to the family," like, the floor needs to know this is going to a whole nother level soon.
As this next video shows, the rioters' anger was focused primarily on Vice President Mike Pence.
This woman comes up to the side of us and she says, "Pence folded." So it was kind of like, okay, well, in my mind, I was thinking, well, that's it, you know. Well, my son-in-law looks at me and he says, "I want to go in."
What percentage of the crowd is going to the Capitol?
100%. It is spread like wildfire that Pence has betrayed us and everybody's marching on the Capitol, all million of us. It's insane.
Did people appear angry as you were walking to the Capitol?
Yeah, a lot of people seem like they're very upset.
Tell us some of the things they were saying, if you recall.
Oh, they were saying all types. You know, people were screaming all types of stuff. They were mad that Vice President Pence was going to accept the electorals. I mean, it was a little. If you could think it up, you were hearing it.
I believe that Vice President Pence was going to certify the electoral votes or not certify them, but I guess that's just changed, correct? And it's a very big disappointment. I think there's several 100,000 people here that are very disappointed.
President Trump did not try to calm his thousands of disappointed supporters. Instead, at almost the same moment violence was getting completely out of hand, Donald Trump sent his 224 tweet. The president said, Mike Pence didn't have the courage to do what should have been done to protect our country and our Constitution. Despite knowing the Capitol had been breached and the mob was in the building, President Trump called Mike Pence a coward and placed all the blame on him for not stopping the certification. He put a target on his own vice president's back. Mr. Pottinger and Ms. Matthews, when we ask you about your reaction to seeing the 224 tweet in real time, you both used the same imagery to describe it. President Trump was adding fuel to the fire. Mr. Pottinger, you made the decision to resign after seeing this tweet. Can you please tell us why?
Yes. So that was pretty soon after or shortly before I'd gotten back to the White House. I'd come from off-site. I began to see for the first time those images on TV of the chaos that was unfolding at the Capitol. One of my aides handed me a sheet of paper that contained the tweet that you just read. I read it and was quite disturbed by it. I was disturbed and worried to see that the president was attacking Vice President Pence for doing his constitutional duty. So the tweet looked to me like the opposite of what we really needed at that moment, which was a de-escalation. And that's why I had said earlier that it looked like fuel being poured on the fire. So that was the moment that I decided that I was going to resign, that would be my last day at the White House. I simply didn't want to be associated with the events that were unfolding on the Capitol.
Thank you. And Ms. Matthews, what was your reaction to the president's tweet about Vice President Pence?
So it was obvious that the situation at the Capitol was violent and escalating quickly. And so I thought that the tweet about the vice president was the last thing that was needed in that moment. And I remember thinking that this was going to be bad for him to tweet this because it was essentially him giving the green light to these people, telling them that what they were doing at the steps of the Capitol and entering the Capitol was okay, that they were justified in their anger. And he shouldn't have been doing that. He should have been telling these people to go home and to leave and to condemn the violence that we were seeing. And I'm someone who has worked with him. You know, I worked on the campaign, traveled all around the country, going to countless rallies with him, and I've seen the impact that his words have on his supporters. They truly latch on to every word and every tweet that he says, and so I think that in that moment, for him to tweet out the message about Mike Pence, it was him pouring gasoline on the fire and making it much worse.
Thank you both. And let's watch what others also told us about their reactions to this tweet.
I don't remember when exactly I heard about that tweet, but my reaction to it is that's a terrible tweet. And I disagreed with the sentiment. And I thought it was wrong.
What was your reaction when you saw that tweet?
Extremely unhelpful.
Why?
It wasn't the message that we needed at that time. It wasn't going to. The scenes at the U.S. Capitol were only getting worse at that point. This was not going to help that.
Were you concerned it could make it worse?
Certainly.
Ms. Hutchinson, what was your reaction when you saw this tweet?
As a staffer that worked to always represent the administration to the best of my ability and to showcase the good things that he had done for the country, I remember feeling frustrated, disappointed, and really, it felt personal. It was really sad. As an American, I was disgusted. It was unpatriotic. It was un-American. We were watching the Capitol building get defaced over a lie.
As you will see, at 2:26, the vice president had to be evacuated to safety a second time and came within 40 feet of the rioters. The attack escalated quickly right after the tweet. During this chaos, what did President Trump do at that point? He went back to calling senators to try to further delay the electoral count. While the vice president was being evacuated from the Senate, President Trump called Senator Tommy Tuberville, one of his strongest supporters in the Senate. As Senator Tuberville later recalled, he had to end the call so that he could evacuate the Senate chamber himself. Let's listen.
He didn't call my phone, called somebody else, and they handed it to me. And I basically told him, I said, Mr. President, we're not doing much work here right now because they just took our vice president out. And matter of fact, I'm going to have to hang up on you. I've got to leave.
Senator Josh Hawley also had to flee. Earlier that afternoon, before the joint session started, he walked across the east front of the Capitol. As you can see in this photo, he raised his fist in solidarity with the protesters already amassing at the security gates. We spoke with a Capitol police officer who was out there at the time. She told us that Senator Hawley's gesture riled up the crowd, and it bothered her greatly because he was doing it in a safe space, protected by the officers and the barriers. Later that day, Senator Hawley fled after those protesters he helped to rile up stormed the Capitol. See for yourself. Think about what we've seen. undeniable violence at the Capitol, the vice president being evacuated to safety by the Secret Service, senators running through the hallways of the Senate to get away from the mob. As the commander-in-chief, President Trump was oath and duty bound to protect the Capitol. His senior staff understood that.
Do you believe, Jared, that the president has an obligation to ensure a peaceful transfer of power?
Yes.
And do you think the president has an obligation to defend all three branches of our government?
I believe so.
And I assume you also would agree the president has a particular obligation to take care that the laws be faithfully executed.
That is one of the president's obligations, correct?
No, I mean, I asked what his duty is.
Well, I mean, there's a constitutional duty. What he has, he's the commander-in-chief. And that was that was my biggest issue with him as national security advisor.
Rather than uphold his duty to the Constitution, President Trump allowed the mob to achieve the delay that he hoped would keep him in power. I reserve.
The gentlewoman reserves. I request that those in the hearing room remain seated until the Capitol Police have escorted members and witnesses from the room. I now declare the committee in recess for a period of approximately 10 minutes.